Welcome to Mind Clarity. If you're ready to rise above the noise, let go of the need for approval, and discover the quiet power within, make sure you join our membership and start your journey toward true inner peace. There's this beautiful idea that what we see in the physical world comes from something invisible. Just like sunlight somehow turns into a rose, everything we experience seems to emerge from a space that has no form, no name, no clear identity. It's a kind of quiet, unseen presence that does nothing, yet somehow leaves nothing undone. And in a way, that's where you come from too. I want to focus on a simple shift in thinking that can quietly change your life. It's the movement away from that constant inner voice saying, notice me, towards something much deeper, learning to live without needing attention, becoming comfortable in obscurity. We live in a world that pushes us to be seen, to stand out, to prove our importance. Everywhere you look, it's about recognition and validation. But there's an ancient teaching that points us in the opposite direction. It says that the sea becomes the king of all rivers because it stays low. Every stream, every river flows into it, not because it demands attention, but because it remains humble. It doesn't chase anything. It simply allows everything to come to it. That idea carries a powerful lesson. When you stop trying so hard to be noticed, when you let go of the need to prove yourself, things begin to flow toward you naturally. I've practiced this more in my life over time, but it wasn't always that way. There was a period when I was deeply caught up in needing recognition. I had written a book years ago that became very successful, staying on bestseller lists for a long time. Every week, I would track its position, watching it rise and fall. And I remember how much my sense of worth was tied to those numbers. There was one moment that really stayed with me. I called home to find out where the book ranked for the upcoming week. I expected good news, but instead I was told it wasn't on the list anymore. My reaction was immediate. My voice changed, my energy shifted. I couldn't believe it. I had been at the top just days before, and then came the clarification. It wasn't me that was ever on the list. It was the book. That small distinction hit deeply. There's a big difference between identifying yourself with your achievements and recognizing that those achievements are separate from who you truly are. Back then, my ego was loud. I wanted to be seen, acknowledged, admired. But over time, I've come to understand something more meaningful. True growth isn't about being better than other people. It's about becoming better than you used to be. And when I look back, I can honestly say I've grown in ways that matter more than any external recognition ever could. The need to constantly say, "Look at me," has softened. That teaching about the sea staying low really stays with me. I live near the ocean, and I often watch it, not just for its beauty, but for what it represents. It's incredibly powerful, yet it doesn't try to show off. It doesn't compete. It simply exists in its natural state, and everything flows into it because of that. So the real question is, can you move beyond that constant urge to be noticed? Can you let go of the need to prove your importance? Because so much of what we see today is built around that desire, this endless cycle of seeking attention and validation. But there's another way to live, a quieter way, one where you don't have to chase recognition because what's meant for you will find you. And in that space, there's a kind of peace and power that no spotlight can ever give. Look around today and you'll notice how much energy is poured into following celebrities, stories about their lives, their problems, their daily routines, even when they haven't really done anything meaningful. Walk through an airport and glance at the magazine stands. It's the same faces repeated over and over, just packaged differently. It shows how deeply we've built a culture around attention, where everything revolves around being seen, being talked about, being important in the eyes of others. And it doesn't stop there. From a young age, we're trained to believe that the person who gets the most attention is the one who matters the most. In schools, the star is often the one celebrated the most. The more people who like you, the more valuable you're considered to be. It quietly programs us to chase recognition, to measure our worth through visibility, through applause, through how many eyes are on us. But what I've discovered in my own life is something very different. The moments that have brought me the deepest sense of peace and happiness are not the ones where I was being noticed. They're the quiet ones. The ones where I was doing something meaningful without anyone even knowing about it. There's a special kind of freedom in moving slowly, quietly, without needing validation. I've seen this kind of quiet generosity in people close to me. Acts of kindness done without any announcement, without any desire for credit. No "look at me," no need for recognition. Just giving for the sake of giving. There's so much wisdom in that. When you're connected to something deeper within yourself, you realize you can accomplish almost anything without needing to claim ownership of it. There's a powerful idea in being able to let go of credit. When you're not obsessed with being recognized, you actually become more effective. You move with less resistance. You're not distracted by how things look. You're focused on what truly matters. It reminds me of that old concept of the magnificent obsession, which isn't about fame or success, but about quietly giving without expecting anything in return. Think about groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. There are no titles, no hierarchy, no one trying to stand above the rest. It's simply people coming together to support one another. No one is trying to be the center of attention. Different people step up at different times, and the focus is always on helping, not on being seen. I've spent time in those kinds of meetings, and what strikes me every time is the depth of humanity you feel there. You see people who are struggling, people who may look broken on the outside, people who feel like life has passed them by. And yet, in those moments, there's something incredibly real and powerful present. It reminds me of something Mother Teresa once expressed, that she saw the divine in what she called distressing disguises. In other words, what we often overlook, what we consider insignificant or broken, may actually carry the deepest presence of something sacred. When you sit in those rooms and listen to people share their stories openly, honestly, without pretending, you can feel that presence. In fact, I've felt more of that genuine connection in those simple gatherings than I ever have in places that are supposed to represent spirituality on the surface. There's something about humility, honesty, and shared struggle that brings people closer to truth than any outward display ever could. And I would honestly encourage anyone to experience something like that at least once. You don't have to be struggling with addiction to sit in and listen. Just being there, hearing real stories, witnessing people supporting each other without ego, it changes your perspective. It reminds you of what really matters. Because in the end, life isn't about being seen. It's not about collecting attention or building an image. It's about connection, presence, and the quiet impact you make when no one is watching. And when you begin to understand that, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing the spotlight, and instead, you become grounded in something far more meaningful. There was a moment in that story where everything became so clear. The realization was simple but powerful. You can take people who feel completely lost, broken, or rejected, and the answer isn't complicated at all. You don't need some grand system or perfect strategy. All you really have to do is love them. That's it. Just care. Just show up with compassion. And when that idea clicks, it fills you with a kind of excitement, because suddenly helping others doesn't feel distant or difficult anymore. It feels possible for anyone. I often think about people like Louise, because to me, she represents that kind of quiet courage. There was a time, especially back in the 80s, when even leaders avoided speaking openly about serious issues like AIDS. It was ignored, pushed aside, and the people suffering were treated like outsiders. But she didn't wait for permission or recognition. She opened her own home and welcomed those who had been rejected by society. She created a space where they could come together, support each other, and learn how to care again. This was long before there was any attention or praise connected to it. It was simply an act of love, done quietly. There's something deeply meaningful about that kind of approach, creating spaces where people can come together without labels, without pressure, without needing to prove anything. Just like those recovery meetings where no one needs to introduce themselves with titles or status. No one is above anyone else. There are no leaders trying to stand out. It's just people helping people. That's where real healing begins. Before those kinds of spaces existed, many people struggling with addiction had no path forward. There wasn't much hope. But what changed everything wasn't some complex structure, it was anonymity. It was removing the ego, removing the need to be seen, and replacing it with genuine connection. No rules, no expectations, just a simple message. You are welcome here, no matter where you are in your journey. Whether you've been sober for years or you're still struggling in this very moment, you belong. And more importantly, you are not your struggles. You are something far greater. There's an old teaching that says the soft and gentle will outlast what is forceful and loud, and that what stays hidden often endures longer than what constantly tries to stand out. It's a reminder to step back from that urge to always be seen, to always be heard, to always prove something. Try becoming a little quieter, a little less reactive, a little less focused on being noticed. Even in simple conversations, you can practice this. When someone else is speaking, instead of waiting for your turn to jump in, pause. Resist that urge to interrupt with your own thoughts. Instead, stay present, listen fully. Say something like, "Tell me more," or "That's interesting, I hadn't thought of it that way before." Even if you disagree, there's value in simply allowing someone else to be heard. That alone can change the entire energy of a moment. I've practiced this myself, and I can tell you, it's not always easy, especially when you're used to being recognized or noticed. There are moments when you feel that pull of attention, that habit of stepping forward. But sometimes, choosing to step back, to remain unseen, brings a different kind of peace. There were times I would deliberately avoid being recognized, just to stay in that quiet space, just to reconnect with that sense of simplicity. Nature itself reflects this truth. Storms don't last forever. Heavy winds eventually settle. Even the longest rain passes. There's a rhythm to everything, and nothing stays intense forever. The same applies to life. What you need, what you're waiting for, it will arrive at the right moment. You don't have to force it or chase it endlessly. You're already connected to everything you're seeking. Just like rivers naturally find their way to the ocean, what belongs to you will come in its own time. The more you trust that, the less you feel the need to push, control, or prove yourself. And when you let go of that constant pressure of ego, of needing to be important, needing to be recognized, you actually open yourself up to doing more, experiencing more, and feeling more at peace. Life becomes lighter. It becomes softer. There's a kind of sweetness in moving through the world without needing validation, just being present, just being real. And in that quiet, gentle way of living, you begin to understand something deeper, that you don't need the spotlight to shine. You already carry everything you need within you. When you really sit with this idea, you begin to notice how deeply the need for recognition is wired into everyday life. It's not just in big things like fame or success. It shows up in small moments too. Wanting someone to agree with you, wanting credit for something you did, wanting to be acknowledged for your effort. None of this is wrong, it's human, but the problem begins when your sense of worth depends on it. That's when you start chasing instead of allowing. The shift toward quiet living isn't about disappearing or becoming passive. It's about changing your inner motive. You still act, you still create, you still contribute, but you're no longer doing it to fill a gap inside yourself. You're doing it because it feels natural, because it aligns with who you are. And ironically, when you stop trying to be seen, people often notice you more, but by then, it doesn't matter in the same way. There's also a kind of freedom that comes from not needing to defend your identity all the time. When you're attached to being right or being important, you feel the need to constantly protect that image. But when you let go of that, you become more open. You listen better, you learn faster, and your relationships become more genuine because you're not trying to dominate every interaction.
Another powerful part of this teaching is trust. Most people struggle because they feel like if they don't push, nothing will happen. But the deeper truth is that life has its own intelligence. Things unfold in ways you often can't predict or control. When you trust that timing, you stop forcing outcomes. You still take action, but it's calmer, more aligned, less desperate. Think about how nature works. Nothing rushes, yet everything gets done. Trees don't compete with each other for attention. Rivers don't force their way to the ocean, they flow. That same principle applies to your life. When you align with it, there's less friction. You're not constantly swimming against the current.
And then there's the idea of anonymity, which is incredibly powerful in a world obsessed with identity. When you do something good without attaching your name to it, it purifies the action. It becomes about the act itself, not the reward. That kind of giving changes you internally. It builds a quiet strength, a sense of integrity that doesn't rely on anyone else's opinion. You also start to see people differently. When you're not focused on status or appearance, you begin to recognize the deeper value in others. You become more compassionate, more patient. You realize that everyone is carrying something, and that beneath all the surface differences, there's a shared human experience. This path isn't always easy because it goes against what society constantly promotes. You'll feel that pull to go back to notice me, especially in moments of insecurity. But every time you choose stillness over noise, humility over ego, presence over performance, you strengthen a different part of yourself, the part that doesn't need approval to feel whole. And over time, that becomes your natural state. You move through life with a quiet confidence. You're no longer trying to prove anything, and because of that, your energy feels different. It's calmer, but also more powerful. It's not loud, but it's steady. And that steadiness is what allows things to come to you in a way that feels almost effortless. In the end, it's not about withdrawing from the world, it's about engaging with it from a deeper place. A place where you're not chasing attention, but expressing truth. Where you're not trying to be someone, but simply being. And that's where real peace begins. When you go even deeper into this, you start to notice that the desire to be seen is often rooted in a fear of being invisible or unimportant. Many people carry a quiet belief that if they're not noticed, they don't matter. So they speak louder, try harder, post more, prove more. But the truth is, your value was never created by attention, and it doesn't disappear in its absence. It exists whether anyone is watching or not. What changes everything is when you begin to feel that internally, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. When you no longer depend on external reactions to confirm who you are, your entire way of moving through life shifts. You become less reactive. Praise doesn't inflate you, and criticism doesn't break you in the same way. You stay more centered, more stable, because your identity is no longer being negotiated in every interaction. There's also something subtle but powerful that happens in your energy when you stop seeking validation. People can feel it. When someone is trying to be noticed, there's often a kind of tension in their presence, like they're reaching outward. But when someone is grounded and doesn't need anything from you, there's a calmness there. It feels safe. It feels real. That kind of presence naturally draws others in without effort. This is why the idea of doing without claiming is so transformative. When you contribute, create, or help without needing recognition, your focus becomes pure. You're no longer splitting your attention between the act itself and how it will be perceived. You're fully in it, and that kind of presence improves the quality of everything you do. It also teaches you patience. When you're not rushing for results or acknowledgement, you allow things to unfold in their own time. Most frustration comes from trying to force outcomes before they're ready. But when you trust the process, you begin to see that delays aren't always denials. They're often part of a larger timing that you can't yet see. Another layer of this is learning to be comfortable with silence, not just external silence, but internal silence. That constant mental noise that says, say something, prove something, show them who you are. When you don't act on it, when you let it pass, you create space. And in that space, clarity appears. You respond instead of reacting. You choose instead of impulsively chasing. It even changes how you experience success. Instead of needing the spotlight to validate your achievements, you start to enjoy the process itself. The work becomes rewarding on its own. The growth becomes satisfying in itself. And when recognition does come, it feels like a byproduct, not the goal. You also become less controlled by comparison. When your focus is internal, you're not constantly measuring yourself against others. You're not asking, am I ahead? Am I behind? You're simply moving forward in your own way. That removes a huge amount of pressure and distraction. And perhaps one of the most powerful shifts is in how you relate to uncertainty. When you trust that things will come at the right time, you're less afraid of not knowing. You don't need to have everything figured out. You can move step by step, allowing life to reveal itself as you go. This doesn't mean you'll never feel the pull of ego again. You will. There will be moments where you want to be recognized, where you feel overlooked, where you want to prove something. But the difference is you'll notice it. And in that awareness, you'll have a choice. You won't be controlled by it in the same way. Over time, this way of living builds a quiet kind of strength. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's deeply rooted. You become someone who can stand steady regardless of what's happening around you. You don't need constant feedback to feel secure. You don't need approval to keep going. And in that state, life starts to feel different. Lighter, more natural, less forced. You're still engaged, still growing, still creating, but without that constant pressure to be seen. You're no longer chasing attention. You're simply aligned with yourself. And from that place, everything flows in a way that feels almost effortless. The deepest power doesn't come from being seen, but from learning to let go of the need to be seen. When you release the constant "notice me" mindset, you step into a quieter, more grounded way of living where peace replaces pressure. Like the ocean that stays low and yet receives everything, true strength lies in humility and trust. What is meant for you will arrive without force, without chase, flowing naturally into your life. And in that stillness, you discover that you were never lacking anything at all.